After 15 years with the Bureau and 6 relocations across the country, I had finally secured a position at headquarters that promised stability. Emma deserved a permanent home. At 13, my daughter had already shown more courage than most adults I knew navigating middle school with spina bifida that confined her to a wheelchair but never dampened her spirit. We purchased the Colonial on Maple Street precisely because the open floor plan could be easily modified for wheelchair accessibility. The tree-lined neighborhood with its community pool and playground seemed perfect, a place where Emma could finally put down roots. The moving truck had barely pulled away when the first neighbor appeared at our door with homemade cookies. Sarah from across the street welcomed us warmly, introducing herself as the Neighborhood Welcome Committee. She mentioned the Homeowners Association meeting the following Tuesday, suggesting I attend to meet everyone. Her smile faltered only briefly when noting that Constance Reynolds ran a tight ship as HOA president. I unpacked boxes while Emma explored the backyard, her wheelchair leaving tracks in the freshly manicured lawn. The property disclosure had mentioned strict HOA regulations, but I had dealt with enough bureaucracy in my career to navigate suburban politics. My priority was establishing normalcy for Emma after years of disruption. "Dad, I think I am going to like it here," Emma called from the patio, her face turned toward the afternoon sun. I smiled, cataloging the accessibility modifications we would need: a ramp for the front steps, widened bathroom doorways, lower countertops in her bathroom. The first HOA violation notice appeared 3 days later. Apparently, our moving boxes stacked neatly in the garage with the door open violated community standards. The second notice arrived the day after we installed the wheelchair ramp, unapproved exterior modification. Each bore the same flowing signature: Constance Reynolds, HOA President. I complied promptly, submitting retroactive approval forms and attending my first HOA meeting. The community center buzzed with suburban energy, neighbors discussing property values and lawn care violations with remarkable intensity. Constance Reynolds presided from a center table, her platinum blonde bob unmovable as she called the meeting to order. She was impeccably dressed in a tailored blazer, a small American flag pin gleaming on her lapel. "We have new residents on Maple Street," she announced without looking in my direction. "I trust they will take time to thoroughly review our community guidelines." Her gaze finally met mine, challenging rather than welcoming. I introduced myself simply as James Wilson, recently transferred from the Chicago office. I maintained the same professional discretion that had become second nature over my career, offering no details about my position with the Bureau. Experience had taught me that advertising my role as Deputy Director of Criminal Investigations complicated personal relationships and potentially endangered my family. That first month established a pattern. Emma attended the local middle school while I converted our home office into my secure workspace for classified materials. The neighbors were largely friendly, often stopping to chat with Emma as she practiced wheeling herself to the community mailbox. But Constance Reynolds watched from her perfectly maintained Colonial across the park, binoculars occasionally visible through her front window. The violations accumulated: grass 1/4 inch too high, trash bins visible from the street for more than 12 hours, unapproved garden hose color. I documented each notice meticulously. Old habits die hard. Emma remained blissfully unaware, thrilled to make friends at school and join the science club. For the first time in years, I heard her laughing freely. Despite Constance Reynolds and her clipboard, I was determined to make this work. This would be our home. The scrutiny intensified as autumn arrived. While other homes received occasional notices, ours collected violations at an alarming rate. Constance Reynolds had clearly designated our property as problematic. The medical equipment delivery truck that brought Emma's new specialized wheelchair triggered an immediate complaint about commercial vehicles in residential areas. The temporary accessibility railing installed by the property management company earned another violation for unauthorized external fixtures. I researched Constance Reynolds discreetly. Nothing in my background as a federal investigator could have prepared me for the dedication this woman showed to enforcing arbitrary suburban regulations. Neighbors referred to her as the clipboard queen or simply HOA Karen, though never to her face. Her husband Milton, a mild-mannered accountant, seemed perpetually apologetic for her behavior. Constance had governed the Oak Ridge Estates HOAF or 7 consecutive years, running unopposed after the previous board members mysteriously resigned midterm. The first direct interaction between Constance and Emma occurred on a crisp Saturday morning. I observed from the kitchen window as Emma practiced navigating our newly paved driveway in her wheelchair. Constance approached with clipboard in hand, her heels clicking aggressively against the sidewalk. "Excuse me, young lady, is your father home?" Constance stood over Emma, blocking her path. "He is inside. Is something wrong?" Emma asked politely, her hands resting on her wheels. This driveway resurfacing was not approved by the architectural committee, and that wheelchair is leaving marks on the community sidewalks. Constance pointed to non-existent tracks with a manicured finger. I stepped outside immediately. "Good morning, Ms. Reynolds. Is there a problem?" "Mr. Wilson, this driveway modification required prior approval, and we have regulations about recreational equipment being visible from the street." She gestured toward Emma's wheelchair with her pen. I maintained professional composure despite the absurdity. "This is not recreational equipment. This is my daughter's mobility device, which is protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act." "I am well aware of the ADA, Mr. Wilson, but our covenants predate those regulations, and our community standards must be maintained." She handed me another violation notice before striding away. Emma's expression had fallen. "Dad, does she not want me to live here?" I knelt beside her wheelchair. "Some people fear what they do not understand, sweetheart, but this is our home, and you have every right to be here." That evening, I drafted a formal letter citing specific ADA provisions that superseded HOA regulations. As deputy director at the FBI, I had access to the Bureau's legal counsel, though I refrained from involving them officially. This remained a personal matter I was determined to handle without leveraging my position. The monthly HOA meetings grew increasingly hostile. Constance dedicated entire segments to properties in violation, using our address as the primary example. The medical equipment delivery vehicle was now characterized as commercial traffic degrading residential character. The wheelchair ramp became an unsightly structural addition visible from common areas. Properties with ongoing violations may be subject to escalating fines and potential liens, Constance announced, staring directly at me during an October meeting. Several neighbors shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. Emma began asking to be dropped directly at school entrances rather than using the main walkway where other students gathered. Some kids asked if we are in trouble because their parents talk about our house breaking rules, she admitted quietly one morning. I started documenting systematically, photographing other properties with similar features that received no violations, recording dates and times of interactions, creating a timeline of escalating harassment. The same investigative techniques I had applied to organized crime syndicates now focused on a suburban HOA president with an unexplainable vendetta against a disabled child. After Constance complained about Emma's physical therapy equipment being visible through our front window, I installed privacy screens but felt my professional restraint wavering. That evening, Emma found me reviewing HOA bylaws in my office. "Are we going to have to move again?" she asked, her voice small. "No, Emma, this time we stand our ground." I closed the bylaws and opened a new document on my laptop. The file name read simply, Reynolds Investigation. The annual Oak Ridge Estates Fall Festival arrived on the first weekend of November. Despite our growing isolation within the community, I encouraged Emma to attend. The event promised carnival games, food trucks, and live music in the Central Park area. A chance for normal teenage experiences I desperately wanted for my daughter. "Are you sure we should go? Mrs. Reynolds will probably have a violation notice ready the moment we arrive," Emma joked, though the anxiety behind her words was evident. "This is your community too," I reminded her as we prepared to leave. "Besides, the festival is being held in public space where the ADA explicitly applies." The park had been transformed with autumn decorations, vendor booths, and activities. Neighbors nodded politely as we arrived, some even stopping to chat with Emma about school projects. For a brief moment, it felt like we might actually belong here. Emma spotted her science club friends near the cider stand and wheeled toward them independently. I maintained distance while keeping her in sight, allowing teenage independence while remaining vigilantly protective, the eternal parental balance. I noticed Constance Reynolds immediately. She wore a burnt orange pantsuit with a Festival C. Amity chair badge prominently displayed. She directed volunteers with imperious gestures, clipboard perpetually in hand. Our eyes met briefly across the crowd, her lips pursing in evident displeasure at our attendance. The trouble began when Emma attempted to join the ring toss game. The booth had been set up with a small step that made wheelchair access impossible. I watched as she approached, then hesitated, assessing how to navigate the obstacle. "Excuse me," Emma called to the volunteer manning the booth. "Could I play from here?" She indicated a position beside the step. Before the volunteer could respond, Constance materialized beside them. "The games must be played according to the established setup. There is a separate area for special needs participants on the south lawn." I moved closer, hearing Emma's response. "I do not need a separate area. I just need to throw from here instead of up there." "Rules are rules," Constance insisted, loud enough for nearby families to hear. "The festival layout was approved by the committee and cannot be modified without proper channels. The Americans with Disabilities Act requires reasonable accommodations," Emma responded, her voice steady despite her reddening cheeks. My daughter had learned to advocate for herself through years of navigating an inaccessible world. Constance leaned down, her voice carrying clearly. "Listen here, young lady. Your father may think his special needs child deserves special treatment, but in this community, everyone follows the same rules." I arrived as a small crowd began to gather. "Ms. Reynolds, my daughter is simply asking to participate in a carnival game. Surely the festival committee chair can authorize such a minor accommodation." Constance straightened, adjusting her badge. "Mr. Wilson, perhaps you should take your daughter to the designated area for her kind. We have volunteers there specifically trained for special situations." "Her kind," I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. "Dad, it is okay. I can go somewhere else," Emma interjected, clearly uncomfortable with the growing attention. "No, sweetheart. You have every right to be here and participate. I turned back to Constance. My daughter will play this game like everyone else, with the reasonable accommodation of throwing from her current position. You continue to disregard our community standards at every turn, Constance hissed, her composed facade cracking. First your unpermitted home modifications, then your disruptive medical deliveries, and now undermining authorized festival procedures. The volunteer at the booth awkwardly extended the rings toward Emma. It is really no problem. She can throw from there. What happened next occurred with such speed that onlookers later gave conflicting accounts. Constance stepped toward Emma, ostensibly to block the volunteer from handing over the rings. She gestured emphatically, her hand connecting with the back of Emma's wheelchair. Whether intentional or accidental, the result was catastrophic. The wheelchair tilted backward, catching on the uneven ground. Emma's upper body lurched as she instinctively grabbed for stability. The decorative harvest-themed trash bin toppled along with her, spilling paper cups and napkins across the ground. A collective gasp rose from witnesses. Emma lay awkwardly half in, half out of her wheelchair, surrounded by garbage, her face contorted with pain and humiliation. "Look what you have done now," Constance exclaimed, as though Emma had caused the disaster herself. "This is exactly why there are designated areas." I reached my daughter in 3 strides, kneeling beside her. "Do not move, sweetheart. Let me check for injuries." My hands trembled as I assessed her position. 15 years of FBI crisis training momentarily abandoned in the face of parental terror. Emma whispered through tears, "Dad, everyone is watching. I want to go home." The crowd had fallen silent. Neighbors I had greeted at HOA meetings now watched uncomfortably, no one stepping forward to help. The volunteer from the booth stood frozen, rings still in hand. Constance used her clipboard to gesture at the overturned trash bin. "Festival volunteers will need to clean this up immediately. This area must be kept orderly." Something inside me shifted irrevocably. The line between professional detachment and paternal protection dissolved. This was no longer about HOA violations or community standards. A grown woman had physically assaulted my disabled child, then showed zero remorse. I gently helped Emma back into her properly positioned wheelchair, checking for injuries while whispering reassurances. Then I stood and faced Constance Reynolds. I reached for my wallet, not for my FBI credentials, which remained secured at home, but for my phone. "Ms. Reynolds, you have just committed assault against a minor with a disability. I am calling the police." My voice carried the absolute authority I typically reserved for directing multi-agency operations. "It was clearly an accident caused by her inappropriate positioning," Constance sputtered, suddenly aware of the murmuring crowd. "You cannot possibly—" "I can and I will," I interrupted, dialing as the first responders approached from their festival first aid station. "And when they arrive, they will be speaking with Deputy Director James Wilson of the FBI's Criminal Investigation Division." The color drained from Constance's face. For the first time since moving to Oak Ridge Estates, I saw something other than contempt in her eyes. I saw fear. The local police response was immediate and thorough once my credentials were verified. 2 patrol cars arrived within minutes, followed by an ambulance to assess Emma's injuries. The responding officer's demeanor transformed visibly when I quietly identified myself, showing my FBI credentials only to official personnel. "Deputy Director Wilson, we had no idea you had relocated to our jurisdiction," Officer Martinez said, her professional composure momentarily slipping. "We would have arranged a proper welcome." I prefer to keep a low profile for family security reasons, I explained, watching paramedics examine Emma for injuries. Today that became impossible. Emma sustained minor physical injuries, bruised ribs, and a sprained wrist from trying to break her fall. The emotional trauma was far more evident as she refused to look at neighbors still lingering nearby. The paramedics recommended monitoring for signs of concussion and documenting all injuries for potential legal proceedings. Constance Reynolds stood isolated near the ring toss booth, another officer taking her statement. Her earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by nervous glances in my direction. I overheard fragments of her defensive explanation, completely accidental and never intended contact. Officer Martinez recorded my statement methodically. "Sir, would you like to press charges?" Absolutely. Assault on a minor with a disability is a serious offense with potential federal implications. My tone remained measured despite the rage still simmering beneath the surface. I will be pursuing every available legal avenue. The festival effectively ended as families quietly departed, uncomfortable conversations already beginning among witnesses. I focused entirely on Emma, arranging for a neighbor we trusted to drive us home while officers continued processing the scene. Before leaving, I confirmed a restraining order would be expedited against Constance Reynolds. That evening, after settling Emma with pain medication and her favorite documentary series, I made a series of calls from my secure home office. The first was to Special Agent David Chen, my most trusted colleague who had overseen regional field operations for 15 years. "Dave, I need a personal favor." I rarely invoked personal connections within the Bureau, maintaining strict separation between professional authority and private matters. Tonight was different. "Name it, James. What is going on?" David had been my academy classmate decades earlier. I explained the situation concisely, emphasizing that while I was not officially involving the Bureau, I needed resources only trusted colleagues could provide. "I will assemble a team for tomorrow, your home or off-site location." His response contained no hesitation. Off-site, the field office conference room at 800. Full background, financial records, everything legal without flagging official bureau involvement. I paused. "And Dave, complete discretion is essential." The following morning, I arranged for Emma to stay with Sarah from across the street, the only neighbor who had consistently shown kindness regardless of HOA politics. I arrived at the regional field office in an unmarked vehicle, using my credentials to access the secure conference room without creating an official record of the meeting. 5 of my most trusted colleagues awaited me, specialists in financial crimes, civil rights violations, background investigation, and prosecutorial strategy. Their presence represented decades of combined federal law enforcement experience, now focused on a suburban HOA president who had made the grave mistake of targeting my child. "This operation remains unofficial and voluntary," I clarified as the meeting began. "Your participation cannot impact performance reviews or advancement opportunities. This is personal, not professional." Special Agent Lisa Kwon, our financial crimes specialist, spoke first. "James, we have already begun preliminary research. Constance Reynolds presents some interesting patterns." The presentation that followed revealed disturbing details about the woman who had appointed herself neighborhood authority. Constance had served on 3 different HOA boards in the past decade, each time leaving amid undisclosed community disagreements. Financial audits revealed question. Able allocation of HOA funds, including $75,000 for landscaping improvements, contracted to her brother-in-law's company. Most significantly, two previous discrimination complaints had been filed against her in other communities, both quietly settled with non-disclosure agreements. The Reynolds household maintains appearance of upper-middle-class stability, Lisa continued, but they are leveraged to the breaking point. 3 mortgages on their property, significant credit card debt, and Milton Reynolds has been quietly selling assets to maintain their lifestyle. The civil rights specialist, Jerome Washington, added, the previous discrimination complaints both involved residents with disabilities, one family with an autistic son, another with a husband requiring oxygen equipment. Both eventually relocated after sustained harassment. I processed this information with growing certainty. This was never about HOA regulations. This was targeted discrimination with a documented pattern. The team continued building the case throughout the day. I divided my attention between strategic planning and checking on Emma, whose physical discomfort was improving faster than her emotional state. By evening, we had assembled an extensive evidence package. Financial documents showing misappropriation of HOA funds, witness statements from residents in previous communities describing similar discrimination patterns, and a comprehensive timeline of escalating actions against my family specifically targeting Emma's disability accommodations. We have enough for multiple civil rights violations, Jerome confirmed. The assault incident provides the flashpoint, but the pattern of discrimination makes this substantially more serious. Additionally, we identified 5 current Oak Ridge Estates residents who had experienced similar targeting but feared retaliation. David had quietly approached them, explaining the situation without revealing my full involvement. While the team worked, I maintained regular parental presence for Emma, helping with homework and discussing her concerns about returning to school. Everyone will know what happened, she worried. Yes, but they will also know the truth, I assured her. Sometimes standing up against injustice means becoming visible when you would rather not be. That night after Emma was asleep, I received a text message from Sarah across the street. Emergency HOA meeting called for Friday evening. Topic: recent community incidents. Thought you should know. I smiled for the first time in days. The timing was perfect. Our evidence package would be complete by Thursday, giving me exactly the forum needed for what came next. Thank you, I replied. We will definitely attend. The community center buzzed with unusual energy Friday evening. Word of the incident had spread throughout Oak Ridge Estates, drawing nearly perfect attendance despite the short notice. Neighbors who typically skipped HOA meetings arrived early, claiming seats and speculating in hushed tones. I deliberately arrived last, Emma beside me in her wheelchair, her wrist still wrapped in a supportive brace. Conversations halted as we entered. Some neighbors nodded sympathetically, others averted their eyes. The room had divided itself physically. Constance Reynolds' usual supporters clustered near the front, while those who had experienced her targeted enforcement sat scattered throughout the back rows. I guided Emma to an accessible space along the center aisle, perfectly positioned for what would follow. Constance appeared composed despite recent events, her hair immaculately styled and a pearl necklace gleaming against her navy blazer. She avoided looking in our direction as she called the meeting to order, shuffling papers with affected nonchalance. Thank you all for attending this emergency session. As you may have heard, there was an unfortunate incident at our fall festival that has created some community concerns. Her voice carried its usual authoritative tone, though I detected underlying tension. The board wishes to address rumors and clarify HOA policies regarding public events and accommodations. Board member Richard Thompson, a retired high school principal who typically rubber-stamped Constance's decisions, cleared his throat nervously. Before we proceed, we should acknowledge that this incident has legal implications. Perhaps we should postpone discussion until— There is nothing to postpone, Constance interrupted. A simple accident occurred during a community event. Certain parties are attempting to characterize this as something more significant, which is unfortunate and unnecessary. I raised my hand, maintaining perfect professional calm. Constance had no choice but to acknowledge me with visible reluctance. Mr. Wilson, this portion of the meeting is for board statements. We will have community comments afterward. I believe the community would benefit from hearing all perspectives before forming conclusions, I responded evenly, particularly since the incident involved my disabled daughter being physically pushed into a trash receptacle. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Constance's knuckles whitened around her gavel. That characterization is both inflammatory and inaccurate. Is it? I stood, stepping into the center aisle. For the first time, I allowed my professional authority to show through my carefully maintained suburban father persona. I think accurate information is exactly what this community needs right now. I approached the front table, placing my FBI credentials on the surface directly in front of Constance. For those unaware, I am Deputy Director James Wilson of the FBI's Criminal Investigation Division. While I had hoped to keep my professional life separate from our community involvement, recent events make that impossible. The room fell completely silent. Constance's face drained of color as she stared at my credentials. Ms. Reynolds, would you prefer to address the community about your actions, or shall I present what my team has uncovered? I offered professionally. Team? What team? She stammered. This is completely inappropriate. This meeting has specific agenda items. Indeed it does. Item 1, the physical assault of a disabled minor. Item 2, pattern of discriminatory enforcement targeting accessibility accommodations. Item 3, financial irregularities within HOA fund management. I turned to face the residents directly. My colleagues and I have prepared a complete briefing on all three matters. On cue, David Chen and Lisa Kwon entered from the back of the room, carrying evidence binders. They distributed these to board members as I continued. Oak Ridge Estates has been systematically subjected to discriminatory practices under the current HOA leadership. I presented the financial documentation first, displaying key pages on the projection screen. HOA funds have been disproportionately directed to companies with direct connections to Ms. Reynolds' family members, including $75,000 for landscaping services provided by her brother-in-law's company without competitive bidding. Board members flipped through their binders with increasing alarm. Richard Thompson's expression shifted from confusion to shock as he reviewed the financial records. Additionally, Ms. Reynolds has demonstrated a documented pattern of discriminatory enforcement targeting residents with disabilities. I advanced the slides to show comparison photographs. Other homes with similar modifications received no violations, while our accessibility features generated multiple citations. Constance finally found her voice. This is preposterous. You have no authority to conduct investigations into HOA matters. As a resident and parent of a child who was physically assaulted, I have every right to investigate civil rights violations and financial improprieties affecting our community. I maintained perfect composure, channeling the same authoritative presence that had directed major federal operations. The tension broke when an older woman in the back stood shakily. "He is right. She did the same thing to us." Mrs. Abernathy, whose husband used oxygen equipment, had generally avoided HOA meetings. We received violation notices weekly after installing a ramp last year. Nothing was ever good enough. Her testimony opened the floodgates. One by one, residents stood to share similar experiences: selective enforcement, personal vendettas, intimidation tactics. Each story reinforced the pattern we had documented. Constance's composure crumbled visibly as her support evaporated. "These are all disgruntled residents who failed to comply with clearly established guidelines. This is a conspiracy to undermine community standards." Board member Jennifer Liu, who had been silently reviewing the evidence, finally spoke. "Constance, these financial records show clear conflicts of interest. Why was the board never informed about your family connection to Evergreen Landscaping?" "That relationship was disclosed in Appendix C of the annual budget." Constance's voice rose sharply. "None of you bothered to read the full documentation." "Actually," I interjected calmly, "our review found no disclosure in any official documents filed with the county or presented to residents." Richard Thompson stood abruptly. "I move to immediately suspend Ms. Reynolds from her position, pending full investigation of these allegations." The motion passed unanimously as Constance watched her carefully constructed authority collapse. Her final desperate attempt came as she pointed accusingly at Emma. "This is all because you think your daughter deserves special treatment. The community has standards that everyone must follow." The room fell silent at this outburst. I did not need to respond. Board member Jennifer Liu did it for me. "Ms. Reynolds, please leave before you face additional legal consequences. The meeting will continue without you." As Constance gathered her belongings with shaking hands, mascara streaking from furious tears, I returned to sit beside Emma. She squeezed my hand silently as Constance Reynolds stormed out of the community center. Her 7-year reign over Oak Ridge Estates conclusively ended. The weeks following the confrontation brought swift and comprehensive changes to Oak Ridge Estates. The morning after the emergency meeting, 3 unmarked government vehicles arrived at the HOA office. Agents from the County Financial Crimes Unit, accompanied by representatives from the Department of Housing and Urban Development's Civil Rights Division, removed boxes of documents and electronic records. Emma watched from our front window as officials carried evidence to their vehicles. "Dad, is Mrs. Reynolds going to jail?" "The justice system will determine appropriate consequences," I explained carefully. "Our job was to bring the truth to light. Now we let the proper authorities do their work." The criminal investigation proceeded methodically. My professional background enabled me to interpret each development while maintaining appropriate distance from the official proceedings. Constance and Milton Reynolds listed their home for sale within days of the initial documentation seizure. The "for sale" sign stood as a visible symbol of accountability. Local authorities filed formal charges against Constance: assault on a vulnerable person, financial misappropriation, civil rights violations. Each charge represented systematic abuse of power that had affected countless residents. The district attorney approached me privately about Emma's testimony. "She has been through enough," I responded firmly. "The physical evidence and adult witnesses should be sufficient without requiring her to relive the trauma." Meanwhile, Emma began physical therapy for her sprained wrist. I arranged sessions with Dr. Kavita Patel, a specialist who understood the emotional dimensions of physical recovery for children with disabilities. Recovery is not just about the body. Dr. Patel explained during our initial consultation. Emma needs to rebuild her sense of security and belonging in the community. Those rebuilding efforts came from unexpected directions. The interim HOA board, led by Jennifer Liu, initiated comprehensive policy reforms. The first official act was establishing an accessibility advisory committee comprised of residents with disabilities and their family members. Emma was invited to serve as the youth representative. "Do you think I should do it?" she asked hesitantly. "Only if you want to," I assured her. "Your voice matters, but healing comes first." Emma attended her first committee meeting the following week, wheeling herself confidently into the community center. The room had been rearranged with wider aisles and designated accessible seating throughout rather than segregated in the back. Small changes, significant meaning. The broader consequences extended beyond our neighborhood. Regional news covered the story, focusing on disability rights rather than sensationalizing the confrontation. 3 neighboring HOAs initiated internal reviews of their compliance with accessibility laws. A state legislator contacted me about strengthening HOA oversight regulations. Throughout this period, I maintained my daily FBI responsibilities while supporting Emma's recovery. My colleagues provided updates on the Reynolds investigation without requiring my direct involvement. The financial trail revealed deeper improprieties than initially suspected, nearly $200,000 diverted through various schemes over 7 years. 6 weeks after the Fall Festival incident, Constance Reynolds appeared in county court for arraignment. I attended as an observer rather than participant, watching as she entered pleas to multiple charges. Her designer outfits and commanding presence had been replaced by subdued business attire and downcast eyes. The judge set trial dates and denied requests for dismissal of charges. The most meaningful transformations occurred within our community. Neighbors who had previously avoided eye contact now stopped to chat with Emma. Several families installed wheelchair ramps on their properties in solidarity, despite having no immediate need. The community newsletter featured an article about accessibility awareness written by Emma and 2 other youth committee members. Sarah from across the street organized a neighborhood improvement day, where residents collectively built an accessible garden area in the community park. Emma designed the raised planters that allowed wheelchair users to participate in the community garden program previously inaccessible to her. "Dad, do you think all this would have happened if Mrs. Reynolds had not pushed me?" Emma asked one evening, as we observed volunteers installing the garden pathways. "Change often requires a catalyst," I responded thoughtfully. "But never doubt that this community was ready for transformation. They just needed someone brave enough to stand up first." As winter approached, the Reynolds home sold quickly despite neighborhood gossip. The new family, parents with twin boys, received a proper welcome basket and accurate information about the revised HOA policies. The "For Sale" sign was replaced by children's bicycles and basketball equipment without a single violation notice. Throughout the legal proceedings, I maintained proper professional distance. Emma's recovery became our priority, both physical healing and emotional resilience. When local news requested interviews, we declined politely. This had never been about publicity or revenge, but about justice and creating lasting change. Spring arrived in Oak Ridge Estates with visible renewal. Cherry trees lining the Central Park exploded with blossoms, and the community calendar filled with inclusive events planned by the reorganized Activities Committee. 1 year after moving into the neighborhood as outsiders under scrutiny, Emma and I attended the Spring Festival as welcomed community members. The court proceedings against Constance Reynolds concluded with a negotiated plea agreement, 2 years probation, substantial financial restitution to the HOA, and mandatory community service hours at a rehabilitation center serving individuals with disabilities. The sentence represented accountability, without vengeance, appropriate consequences for actions that had caused real harm. Emma's Accessibility Committee contributions had transformed community thinking. The playground now featured adaptive equipment, allowing children of all abilities to play together. HOA communications included Braille and large print options. The community pool installed a proper wheelchair lift rather than the makeshift accommodations previously offered. "Look, Dad," Emma pointed excitedly as we arrived at the spring festival. "They built the ramps exactly how we designed them." The central pavilion now featured graceful, gently sloped access rather than the temporary metal ramps previously rolled out for special events. The change symbolized permanence accessibility as fundamental design rather than reluctant accommodation. Jennifer Liu, now the elected HOA president, greeted us warmly. "The accessibility guidelines you helped develop are being shared with communities across the county. 3 other neighborhoods have already adopted them." Emma beamed with justified pride. Her traumatic experience had catalyzed meaningful change, extending far beyond our immediate community. The official HOA documentation now prominently featured a non-discrimination statement and clear accountability measures for all board members. Throughout the festival, I observed Emma navigating independently, greeted by name by neighbors who had once avoided eye contact. She joined the science club demonstration without hesitation, explaining principles of environmental sustainability to younger children gathered around her display. Milton Reynolds appeared briefly at the community service booth, fulfilling his court-mandated volunteer hours. He nodded acknowledgement from a distance, the gesture carrying complicated recognition of harm caused and lessons learned. I returned the nod without animosity. Justice had been served without destroying lives. As afternoon sunlight filtered through fresh leaves, I found myself conversing with neighbors about ordinary concerns, lawn care tips, summer vacation plans, middle